Several analysts have examined the links between the so-called Orange Revolution in Ukraine of 2004 and Euromaidan of 2014. There were also other earlier protests in Maidan that some may remember, including one by students in 1990, which ended up removing, or helping to remove, the then Prime Minister Vitaly Masov. So there's something of a tradition of using the Maidan for a mass protest. Both 2004 and 2014 focused to some extent on corruption, particularly in the office of the president, though it had reached a much higher scale under Viktor Yanukovych than under Leonid Kuchma. But I think there are a lot more differences than similarities, indicating a lack of continuity rather than a revival of past animosities. So today I've simply singled out 12, which I'll go through briefly and obviously no more than 1 minute at a time. They won't take a minute at a time. But first of all, the Orange Revolution was not really a revolution at all. It was an uprising that brought about a change of president through a more accurate counting of votes, but not a change of government. That Viktor Yushchenko is now perceived by most analysts as a failure as president derives from several reasons, not least his own incompetence. But there was also a second factor, I think, that emphasizes the contrast. And this is the second point. In 2004, the European option for Ukraine was a distant hope rather than anything tangible. Whereas in November 2013, it appeared to offer a serious alternative to the Russian customs union and a common economic space with Russia, Belarus, and Kazakhstan. But European unity on Ukraine did not last, and whether the association agreement offered a viable alternative is still a moot point. But nonetheless, when Euromaidan started, that option was at least on the table. Third, in 2004, the protests focused on many things, but there was always an elite alternative to the government of Kuchma in the persons of Viktor Yushchenko and Yulia Tymoshenko. In 2014, there were no discernible leaders in waiting, and patently the parliamentary opposition leaders remained marginal figures. Rather, there were factions that came to the fore at different times. Essentially, there was a total rejection of the leaders within the existing government, as well as significant antagonism to parliamentary parties such as the Regions and the Communists. Fourth, in 2013 and 14, the protests were marked by outbursts of extreme violence on the part of both the government and the demonstrators, culminating in the massacre of February 21st, 2014. Though there have been exhaustive studies, I put exhaustive in quotation marks, of the influence or non-influence of militant rightist forces in Euromaidan, and clearly these groups were negligible in terms of their electability, there seems no doubt that at crucial times they were prepared to force the issue during periods of confrontation. In this respect, the lessons of 2004 may well have been a factor behind the militancy, that is, the failure of the Orange events to change fundamentally the power structure of Ukraine. Number 5, in Euromaidan, more so than in the Orange Revolution, the protests outside Kyiv at least kept pace with those at the center. In various parts of Ukraine, pro-Yanukovych local governments were ousted from office and their leaders removed. Sixth, Russia was a factor in both 2004 and 2014. In the early events, Vladimir Putin, then we remember coming to the end of his first term as president, had attempted to influence the outcome of the presidential election and had fully endorsed Yanukovych's campaign beforehand. In fact, Yanukovych campaigns were featured in Moscow. In 2013, Russia offered an alternative to this association agreement and advanced the offer of a substantial loan to Ukraine. The direct intervention of Russia in Crimea followed the removal of Yanukovych from office, and Putin insisted that he was protecting Russian language speakers in Ukraine. The question why Russia was prepared to intervene in 2014, but not in 2004, is easily answered. In 2004, while Russia disapproved of the uprising, it saw that the uprising didn't necessarily signal a complete change of direction in Kyiv. It simply wasn't clear at the time. Seventh, there was no obvious oligarch involvement in 2004, perhaps because these personalities were less entrenched in society than a decade later. In 2014, however, several oligarchs supported the cause of Euromaidan and continue to support the campaign. The Donbass magnate Rinat Akhmetov ultimately did so as well. And the allegiance of Ihor Kolomoisky in Dnipropetrovsk was vital, ensuring that that city remained on the Ukrainian government's side when rebels began to take over administrations in the east. And an oligarch politician, which is not really a rarity in the Ukrainian parliament, Petro Poroshenko, became the 5th president of Ukraine. Number 8, on both occasions, Western powers supported the protests in Ukraine as a progressive and pro-democratic manifestation of the popular will. The extent of US involvement in both uprisings is debatable, but it was manifest much more overtly in 2014 through the appearance in Kyiv of some government officials and maverick individual politicians such as Senator John McCain. Number 9, in 2014, unlike 2004, social media played a vital role at various times in summoning people to the square, communication, locally, nationally, internationally, and not least the organization of factions, sections, military hundreds, and relaying information about government responses. Number 10, in 2014, representation on the square was wider and subject to changes. Observers initially detected a youthful, pro-European element, but after the end of November, and even more so after the short-lived dictatorship laws of January 16, 2014, the makeup of the protesters was older, more varied, with significant representation from the center and east, as well as from Western Ukraine. 11, the scale of the protests was broader, and the number in the streets significantly higher than in 2004, although it did vary. It would go down on weekdays and go back up at weekends. And lastly, the Orange Revolution lasted for about 5 weeks. Euromaidan continued after the departure of Yanukovych, though it reached its climax on February 21, 2014, almost exactly 13 weeks after it began. This makes it far longer than the 2011 revolution in Egypt, but shorter in duration than the Libyan revolution of the same year. And it's with that revolution that it's sometimes being compared. On the other hand, one could make the argument that Euromaidan has not yet ended, and one may see further outbreaks as a result of the war in the east, the failing economy, and not least the sluggishness of the Poroshenko-Yatsenyuk leadership in unraveling corruption in society. So clearly, the outcome is not yet determined. Thank you very much.